Hey, good morning. It is April 10th, 2018. My name is Jeff Fritz. Welcome back to my live coding stream here. I like to call it Fritz and Friends. I'm First off, the hat today kind of tips at what we're going to be talking at. I'm wearing, of course, Doctor Strange's Eye of Agamotto. Those of you familiar with Marvel Comics know that his pendant holds the Infinity Gem, the Time Gem, and that's what we want to talk about today. Because I've been having a little problem dealing with dates and times, particularly with time zones. And time zones have always been a pain in my neck. So I decided to bring in an expert, somebody who knows a heck of a lot more about managing times and time zones than I am. So I brought on Jon Skeet. Jon, thanks so much for joining me today. Oh, this is great. So can you introduce yourself so folks know where they may have seen you before? No. There's definitely something to be said about, gosh, if you've asked a question on Stack Overflow about C Sharp, there's a high likelihood John's answered it. I mean, I'm just saying. Now, some of our friends out there who've been viewing and watching the stream, they've been working with me over the past week or so. We've been building out a little moderator bot that's sitting in the Twitch chat room and also sitting in the Mixer chat room. And somebody created a command, and I decided to let it come through, and we added it. It's the Skeet command, and it posts random facts about Jon Skeet, similar to those you may have seen, like Chuck Norris. So you may see some folks with using the Skeet command over there to talk about it. I don't, you know what? I think I still have you muted over here. Do I? No, no, we're good. Yeah. Oh no. Try again. It's not routing through. Oh no. Oh no. All right, let's take a quick look here. Try again.
Okay, can anybody hear me now?
There we go. Oh my gosh,
Oh,
I am so
oh,
sorry. I thought we had that working.
aha, there's a yay in the chat room. Hooray! Cool.
Oh my gosh. So we did all that great intro and nothing.
Okay, shall I go back and give that again?
Yeah, go ahead, give a quick intro.
Sure.
I'm
Okay, so
sorry.
I'm Jon
Oh my
Skeet.
gosh.
You probably know me from Stack Overflow if you know me at all, um, where I answer a lot of C Sharp and Java questions. I'm a Google software engineer working from the London office, but often working from my home office in my shed. And my day job is making Google Cloud Platform rock for C Sharp developers, particularly working on client libraries to connect to all the awesome services that my colleagues provide. Um, yeah, and I write C Sharp in depth, which I'm currently writing my fourth edition. So I think that's enough plugs for sort of my day job and my book. Stack Overflow doesn't need any plugs.
No, no, oh my gosh, they're quite busy over there. Um, okay, so I had reached out to you. I've been starting this. It's really intended to be an intro level project. It's a
Hmm.
simple wiki for ASP.NET Core, and we want to use it to introduce some of those simple concepts around using C Sharp, around using .NET, and Razor pages, so folks can learn how to build a website and learn .NET easily. But one of the problems that I've been running into is how to manage dates and times. And time zones are kind of a weird thing when you start thinking outside of your one time zone. Whether
Yep.
it's me in Eastern time or you on London time. You're on summertime now, right?
We are. Yes. Yes, we're
So
in.
so there's the whole daylight savings thing that happens in there also. And that's just weird to deal with, and managing it with data is kind of strange.
Right.
So can we go over to the code and talk about some ways to deal with
Absolutely.
this? All right,
Yes.
let me switch over to code. Ta-da, there we go. All right. Is there a giant washing machine behind you in the garden?
So there isn't a giant washing machine. There is a wind sculpture, which is sort of coppery, beautiful thing that my wife bought me for my 40th birthday, I think. That may be what people can see. If it's a round thing, then yeah, that's probably it. If it's more squarish, then oh, I don't know. It may be just my back door.
I gotta admit, I'm kind of jealous that you have your own building for an office. I just have the extra bedroom here that I.
I mean, this is half home office and half actual shed, but yeah, I needed somewhere that I could work reasonably peacefully, and we're otherwise out of rooms. My wife has a study in the house itself. Could you share again with me the code?
Yes, absolutely. So here's the project I have open. It's called Core Wiki. You can find this out on my GitHub. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start Visual Studio Live Share. And there we go. I've got a code available. I'm going to pass that on to John in our top secret Skype chat room here. There's another follower. Welcome, Ulmi, while John's connecting.
Very good timing while Visual Studio starts up and things.
Yes. And look at that. My Twitch chat is not listening anymore. I don't think you have enough hats. Well-grained pigeon. Little do you know, I have a huge rack that's behind the green screen over here, and there's another set of them over here. And sure, it looks like my chat commands have stopped responding again. There's something. Oh, you know what it might be? It might be a timeout going on over there on the chat. Take care. I did some commits in the dev branch, says Ivan Avandro. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Avandro. There we go. John's connected. We'll take a look at those commits probably on another stream, Avandro. I want to spend some time working with John today on our date questions that we have. All right. So you can see here where John is inside my code with the little flag here with his name. And you can even see where he's connected up here with his initials. Now, I've done a little bit of work to at least save and get dates out of the database. And just to show folks, I have one model in the database right now, and it's an article model. And I have this one date time field here that's the published date. And that feels pretty standard. I want to save the date and time when I last published this. So is that good enough? I mean, do I just save the UTC time into this field? Uh-oh.
So it all depends on what you want to do. You said, I want to save the date and time that this was published.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that? Do you mean I want to save the instant in time at which that happened?
Okay.
Or that you actually care, depending on who published it, what local time it was for them? So, for example, suppose we were both to publish separate articles at exactly the same time, and imagining that we did know what time zone each of us were in. Sure. Would you want it to record the fact that for me it's 10 past 3 in the afternoon and for you it's 10 past 10 in the morning? Or is that kind of irrelevant in terms of the user that happened to publish it? Is it like a timestamp that's just auto-generated from some notion of now?
Yeah. I think it is just auto-generated from now, and it's more important to the person who's reading it.
Okay.
Right.
So you may want to display it in their local time.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So probably now is we've been going 2 minutes and I haven't yet mentioned Noda Time.
That's okay.
So Noda Time is my date and time project that was originally based on Joda Time, which was a Java library, very, very popular Java library, because however much I may be nasty about the date and time support in .NET, pure Java, original Java, had much, much worse support for a long time. These days, Java has the java.time package, which was kind of half masterminded by the same person who was behind DateTime, a guy called Stephen Colborn. Not Stephen Colbert, very, very different. I have
Is
no idea what his grasp of time zones is, but I'm not sure I would necessarily trust any code.
okay.
Anyway, so I started NodaTime basically after giving a conference talk which said, hey, dates and times aren't too bad so long as you've got the right tools for the job. Oh, there aren't the right tools in .NET. And I felt morally obliged to do something about it.
Okay.
So I started NodaTime and sort of kept all the details, all the implementation details of DodaTime hidden, which was useful because I then changed them completely under the hood.
Okay.
And we're now at version 2.4 or something like that. So yeah, NodaTime makes it a lot easier for us to talk about all the different kinds of date and times that we might talk about. Here you've got DateTime, and we've only got a few options there. We've got DateTime or DateTime offset. Those are pretty much the only options for the types you would use for published. Whereas in NodaTime, we can think about a lot more options.
Okay. Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know my background, before I started working for Telerik, I worked for a little .com that did automated substitute teacher placement. Right. So we would schedule folks to work jobs, and I was working on another version of that application that scheduled nurses, and nurses have to work 24 hours. And John, let me tell you, the nightmare it was when you had to schedule a nurse over the daylight savings
Right?
changeover.
Yep.
Huh. Are they working 4 hours or 3 hours? Or is it 5 hours because there's an extra hour in there and
Exactly.
2 a.m. occurs twice?
Indeed. Or they could, maybe they would have a short shift that would start at 1:45 in the morning and end at 1:15 in the morning.
Yes.
After they've done half an hour, and it's suddenly earlier
How's
than they
that
start.
work? Very
Let me just
confusing.
say that whatever you may have been confused by before, there are potential deeper, darker corners. Time zones and calendar systems are just the gift that keeps on giving in terms of trivia.
Oh, yes.
So we probably won't go down too far because otherwise I will scare people. But we can start talking about the different models of what we can represent in NodaTime. So
Let me close that article class. 1 second. I can't type in my own editor. Oh, there it goes. No, it's not letting me type.
so
I,
I can do it.
yeah, I just wanted to format it.
Although if I'm going to start editing, I'm going to start doing other things as well. This is always dangerous. No, I
So,
shouldn't.
oh yeah. Um,
It was whatever page you were on before that had a single expression method. And it was just dying to be an expression body member and wasn't. And
oh,
yeah,
look, we
we'll get
can.
to that at some point.
Yeah, we can absolutely come around and fix that. So, all right. So, should we add Noda time to this project?
Yes,
Okay.
which
So,
is as simple as adding the NodaTime
package.
package. Yes.
All right. So I'm going to right click on the project up here. I'm going to manage NuGet packages, browse, and let's go find Noda time. Fantastic. Should I bring in the beta or?
No, just stick with the existing whatever it is at the moment.
225.
225. Yes.
All right.
Yes, because we had a new release of time zone data just recently. I'll talk about versioning of time zone data later.
Oh no, that's right,
Oh, yeah.
because time zones can legally change in different countries. Oh yes,
Yeah.
I remember going through that nightmare here in the States when they decided, oh, we're gonna make daylight savings start 2 weeks earlier. What?
Right. The Energy Act of 2005 or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So everything that you fear about versioning and everything that you fear about time zones come together in one beautiful, horrible mess.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Is it gonna let me? Oh, now I could type. All right, I'm gonna Control KD and fix that spacing real quick. There we go. All right. So I'm using DateTime now, and I'm defaulting it to UTC now. How should we more standardly take care of that?
So
Standardly?
there are two problems here. One is using DateTime, which is kind of, we can see that it's always UTC, but you can't necessarily. If you just look at the published property, it'll say, well, it's of type DateTime. What does that mean?
Mm.
And just imagine that you had a number type, and sometimes it was a floating point type, sometimes it was always integers, and sometimes it was a fraction or something. You
Mm.
wouldn't put all of that into one type.
No.
But with DateTime, there's the property called kind, which says, is this a UTC DateTime? Is it a local DateTime, where local means local to your particular system time zone? Or is it unspecified, which means we don't really know where it is. We only know the local time somewhere.
So let me just put a DateTime here so we can look at those properties. Just here in IntelliSense. So
Right.
there is a what
dt.kind, KIND.
there it is. Right. We can
And basically and this isn't even going into complicated stuff around calendar systems, because a date time is always in the Gregorian calendar, despite the fact that you can construct it via a non-Gregorian calendar. It's always effectively converted to the Gregorian calendar. So there are these three kinds of date times, and you get easily confused if you only know, well, I'm going to be past the date time value. What does that mean? And what do I do if it's local? Because that's system local, and why do I care about the time zone on the server that it's running on? That kind of thing. So that's one aspect that is problematic in your published property, and the other is testability, but we'll come on to that in a minute.
So before we go too much further, I want to thank you, Magnus, for subscribing to the channel. And now Magnus has access to that C# bot emote. But John, one of the things that I've done to kind of make it clear that a date time that we've stored in the past, it's almost like that Hungarian notation. I would change my field here to be named published UTC.
Right. And that's a great indicator. That makes it clear what the intention is, but there's nothing to stop someone from accidentally writing published UTC equals datetime.now.
Yeah.
And that's now wrong.
Sure.
So I mean, let's use the type system.
Yes, right. The type system will help us throw errors during the build process. Where we could put together something like a Roslyn analyzer, but that's not going to help you at build time.
Right. And it won't really help in terms of not being able to do things that you ought not to be able to do. So if we want to model the publish time as a timestamp, so I think of a timestamp as just a point in time where something happened.
Okay.
That has no notion necessarily of time zone, certainly, and not even of calendar. So, if I click my finger like that happened at a point in time, and we might agree on some UTC time in Gregorian calendar, but someone else may be using some completely different calendar, the Coptic calendar or whatever. So there's nothing inherent.
Hey there, Steve. Good to see you. Thanks for interrupting, Steve.
There's nothing inherent in a timestamp that says it's in the Gregorian calendar, etc. So if we're using NodaTime, and we can now, as you've added that, I'm not sure whether the fact that you've added it will make it instantly available here in Visual Studio. It's gathering suggestions.
Ooh.
Let's see what happens.
So John's alluding to the fact that we've had a couple challenges with IntelliSense to guests using Visual Studio Live Share.
You've added a package reference in Visual Studio Code. I have no idea whether that package reference will have been picked up and automatically built or not.
So are you using Visual Studio Code or full Visual Studio?
Full Visual Studio.
Okay. It should come across.
So I'm just going to try adding the using directive directly. And this is where everyone can see how I can't type.
That's okay. You know what? It turns out that's one of the things that folks like seeing here on stream when we're
Right.
live coding is, you know what? Not everybody's perfect at building this stuff first time.
Right.
We're really smart. We know our
In fact,
stuff.
no one's perfect at building it first time. Yeah. So
I'm just going to mute Steve so that he still pops up but isn't as loud.
okay, it's not building for me. So I've just added some code, and interestingly, the spacing work is fine for me, but not for you. Oh, it's because you've got two character tabs or whatever.
Yes, I do. I have
Visual.
very short tabs, so everything can fit on screen here.
Right. So if you do a build now, just out of interest, does the build work?
I'm getting it. So the build is actually hiding behind me here, and it looks like, yep, build succeeded. You can't see it
So the
behind
build
my chair
hasn't
there.
succeeded for me because, presumably because it's not kind of noticed that I've got NodeTime now. So if I make a change myself to the, I can't edit the CS proj file. Interesting.
No, that's one thing that it will not let you do. So if we want to make a change over here, let's, where'd it go? Edit.
Well,
edit.
it's more forcing it to rework out all the references.
Oh no, it picked it up. I can see instant here highlighted.
Yeah, you've got it.
It
But
didn't come through to you?
it hasn't come. So I have the change in the CS proj file, but Visual Studio hasn't kind of noticed that that it has changed.
That it has the feature available.
Yeah. So I may need to type somewhat without any hints, as it were, which is fine. You know, we can get it working. So an instant in NodeTime is exactly what I mentioned before. It's a timestamp. It's an instant in time that different people will call different things.
Is that more along the lines as to like how Unix stores time, where it's really just right? It's a long number.
Well, so that's an implementation detail.
Okay.
As far as you're concerned, it's just an instant. I happen to know it's stored as two integers. One is the number of days before or after the Unix epoch, and one is the number of nanoseconds within the day. But that's purely an implementation detail, and it has changed over time. In fact, instant hasn't changed as much, but when we talk about local date time and zone date time, those have changed massively over time for performance reasons. So the next thing you would want to do is the equivalent of this datetime.utc now, and let's talk about testability. So I noticed that we don't have a test project at the moment,
No.
and that's fine. But if you did, how would you test this?
Yes, very good question. How should you test?
Well, the problem here is that you're sort of reaching for a global variable, effectively, which is the system clock. And in NodeTime, you don't have a system clock, or rather, you don't have you have an access to it if you want, but the idea is that you refer to it as an iClock. So what I would do, for example, is
So you're suggesting that time itself is a dependency when we're unit testing?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
So anything that's kind of global, if you think about time as a service, so suppose your system didn't have a clock and you had to reach over the network for it, you would have a dependency for that. So why don't we normally? Same with random numbers, same, in fact, for time zones as well. So it's not that it's deliberately very hard to get at the system time zone in NodeTime, but it doesn't happen without you being explicit about it.
Okay. There's a question here in the chat room. How precise is NodeTime?
So its precision is down to the nanosecond as of version 2.
Okay.
Because for version 2, I can let the cat out of the bag now. I was working on protocol buffers, which is Google's serialization format, and we standardized on nanoseconds. And it feels like basically the world has moved to nanoseconds being a unit which is precise enough for almost everyone, but still reasonable to work with. whereas in version 1 of NodeTime we use ticks, which is the 100 nanosecond unit of time, which is very Windows specific. So as .NET becomes less Windows specific, it makes sense for its date and time not to be as Windows specific either.
Okay.
Which has caused an awful lot of interesting coding. Things that used to be represented just by a single long are now an int and a long, and some interesting arithmetic going on. But we manage that. So back to this idea of dependencies.
Yes.
NodeTime has the idea of an I clock, and a clock will tell you the current instant in time, and that's all it will tell you in itself. So there's then an implementation for system clock. So that is a singleton, which many people go, oh, singleton pattern. Well, it's a singleton because you're running on a machine and it has a clock. It is a reasonable singleton, and that's not something I say very often.
You don't have two clocks on your machine. There's one system clock.
Exactly. But the bad side about singletons that, you're tying yourself to something and it makes it untestable. Well, that's why I wouldn't refer to system clock within this code. You could write system clock dot instance dot get current instant. Okay. This used to be now, I think, in NodeTime 1, but we changed it into a method to reflect the fact that it really wasn't a property that you'd expect to stay stable. It's not computing something necessarily, but it is something that changes all the time. So we thought a method was more suitable than a property.
Sure.
But you don't want to do this. Instead, you want to take an iClock. So let's say maybe we make it private settable, and then something like set published time to now. I'm hopeless at naming, and maybe this would be in the constructor. Maybe it would be. There are all kinds of ways of doing this, and it takes a clock, and then we can just say, okay, published equals clock dot get current instant. And I really hope all of this still compiles, because it's not going to compile for me. I'll have to trust you to point out when I've made mistakes.
No, we're looking good. I'm not seeing any issues here on my side. Okay.
And then it would be no good or very little good if iClock only had a single implementation. So NodeTime has, there are 3 packages that people are likely to use. One is NodeTime. One is nodetime.serialization.jsonnet for if you're serializing NodeTime types to and from JSON. But the other one is nodetime.testing, which is a package that you would never put as a dependency in your main project. So I wouldn't be suggesting that we add this to corewiki.csproj. But if we had corewiki.test.csproj with all our tests, you'd add a nodetime.testing reference to that, and then you can get the fake clock type, which says I want to get a clock that always says it's 11 a.m. on this particular date or whatever it is.
Right.
And I think we have the ability for it to auto advance as well. So every time you ask for the current instant, it can advance by 1 second, etc.
Okay.
Does that give much benefit? Well, not for this particular example, because you unless you're testing that the property does what it says it does, that's not terribly hard. If you were doing anything more interesting, like we probably will later on, displaying this instant in time, then it becomes a lot more interesting, because we can say, well, okay, we expect to get some certain text. If we give these inputs, we want to get those outputs. And if you can't fix what those inputs are, then it becomes really hard. So this is one of the things NodeTime does for you, is tries to force you to think about things that are good to think about. A lot of programmers don't want to have to think, and there's a whole book somewhere called Don't Make Me Think, I think. And NodeTime takes the exact opposite point of view. We want you to think about your problem domain and then we try to make it as easy as possible for you to then do the right thing with that. So we do. It's not like we are sadists and want to make you work really hard and do all the code yourself. In fact, if you have to write any looping calendar related code, then that probably means there's a missing feature.
Okay.
But we do want you to have to think about what you're doing. So you have to choose, am I going to use instant? Am I going to use local date time, zone date time, offset date time? All of these, local date, local time, all of these choices where in regular .NET, you might have just said, I'll just use date time. I don't really know what it means. It might be a date. It might have a time. Who knows? I'll just use date time. No,
Sure,
it's useful to think about that.
that's the lowest barrier, right?
Right.
And when I don't need to be precise, when it's just for me and it's not something being shared outside of my region to folks in other time zones, I don't need to worry about that. Thank you for the subscription, Lane Ling. I appreciate that. So, John, somebody asks in the chat room about system date time. Is that?
Yep.
Are you familiar with that package?
Another package for system.datetime? I'm not familiar with it. Oh, system.time, do you mean? Let me just have a look. I haven't seen system date time
Okay.
as a package. There are.
Oh, it's a custom type they have.
Okay.
And that
Right.
proxies to
Oh, I
DateTime
see.
UTC now.
Okay.
Ah, okay.
To avoid people having to accidentally. I would definitely be in favor of a rosin analyzer that sort of triggered the ejector seat anytime
Encourages.
you use datetime.now.
Okay. So, all right. So we've identified that we're going to bring in the clock, and we're going to at some point take care of converting this into local date time for somebody.
Right.
And the standby reloading has this is the elephant in the room now. What does the instant type that you have here now on published on line 20, what does that convert to with Entity Framework SQL?
Nothing at all, because Entity Framework doesn't have enough support. So this is an area I know really very, very little about.
Okay.
I'm not going to try to make myself seem cleverer than I am, because I just don't know this stuff.
Okay.
I have not used Entity Framework ever in production. I've used it a tiny bit just for writing C# in depth. However, I know smart people who do use Entity Framework, and they have told me that basically it needs better support for sort of primitive types.
Okay.
So what I would potentially
primitive types
do,
or user-defined types?
well, non-compound types, so things that you want to represent in a single field, I guess, and be able to model however you want. So instant is a relatively simple type. If I were storing it in a database, I would be potentially tempted to use whatever date time or timestamp type that represents in that database, but it really depends on how much fidelity you want. So if the timestamp type on the database you're using only has precision of milliseconds, but you're using nanoseconds in Noda time, then things could get hairy. You could use an integer type and have it the number of nanoseconds, which can also have hairiness in terms of it's fairly easy to get the number of nanoseconds from an instant. I think you can get it as a big integer. I think I'm kind of relying on memory now rather than using IntelliSense, because IntelliSense won't work for me. But you could get it as an integer. And it partly depends on what else is going to look at your database. So if you're trying to look through timestamps in any other tool, it's really useful if it's a timestamp in SQL. However, if that loses precision, then that's it's very much pros and cons, as development often is.
Okay. So, thinking out loud, if we're not going to store the instant in the database, but instead we want to store that instant as a point in time with this published field, I think we want to then mark this. What is it? I forget the command. It's like no store or something.
Right.
Non.
I don't know either, but yeah, something saying we don't want to try to put this into Entity Framework.
Yeah.
But what we can then do is say, do you know what, this published, we could make this published date time, and maybe even make it obsolete, and say, you don't want to be using this, and we can just make it delegate to the real one, by saying anytime we are asked for it, we'll call published dot to DateTime UTC, I think, and anytime it's set, we'll say published equals value dot. Now we've got some NodeTime extensions. I'm just looking in the NodeTime documentation myself because I can't remember everything basically. And we do have some DateTime extensions, and so we can say to instant. So I can use NodeTime.extensions. So I believe this is called a buddy property.
Sounds.
That's something I've heard said. I don't know whether that's official terminology or not. And you kind of don't really want this to be public. You would like this to be private, and only Entity Framework would ever use it. It's only there for the sake of Entity Framework. And we can say this property only exists for serialization purposes. And one technique you may want to think about if you do this a lot is having a separation of your storage model that could have all Entity Framework types, and then the model that you work with everywhere else in your code, and you can transfer between the two. And I've certainly seen that for if you're forced to use a particular JSON format and it's a pain in whatever way, and you think, I don't want this. I want JSON.NET to handle all of this stuff for me, but it's in the wrong representation. Well, introduce another representation and make sure that you convert to and from the bad representation only exactly when you need to.
Yeah, there's a way to specify. It's like a metadata class that you can put next to it.
Is this an EF thing?
Yeah, there's an EF thing. It's an attribute you can put on, that you can put on the class that says here's where the data definitions are.
Oh,
and you
right.
can put
Okay.
all your metadata over there. And I'm forgetting, and I'm trying to look it up here real quick. There's a way that you can do that. Domain and persistence. Nobody will ever screw that up. Am I still using model objects in your views? Hang on, we're starting simple here before we start looking at view models and really making things complex here.
Although it's along the same lines of kind of having one representation for one job and a different representation for another. So they're definitely related.
Absolutely. So
yeah.
Published here, if I'm reading the docs correctly, we should be able to say not mapped and be able to get that. Yep, there we go. Bring that in. So not mapped says don't map this to the database. So
Right.
it won't store instant. We don't know what that is. However, when we do write an instant, that's going to, well, the publish date time, when it gets it, it'll grab it from that value. And
Right.
we'll be able to
So
work with
we
it.
would presumably use something like this data type and say it's a date time. Let's see what the options are. Data type dot time, date time. I guess it's a date time. Who knows? See,
Right.
this is where I get very confused, because databases have really bad support for date and time things, typically at least.
Well,
and
actually,
you get some very confusing things like Postgres, timestamp with time zone, that doesn't have a time zone. It's just it converts it when you specify it and things.
what I've seen, this data type attribute, right? This isn't just used for Entity Framework to write out to the database and specify, oh, this is a date time field. or right DateTime to field in Oracle, right? We also use that on MVC when we have the text field generated. We do input ASP4, and then when we specify this field, it sees that it's a date time and not just a date, and gives
Right.
us appropriately those
Yep.
two. So
If only we had a type system where you could specify the difference between a date and time. It's almost like we need a kind of date type, but not Java's date type, which actually means an instant. The number of ways that Java screwed this up is just immense. Um,
and to be clear, we're not trying to start a Java versus .NET thing here.
no, absolutely. It's only Java util date and Java util calendar are just so much fun to work with as anti-patterns. Anyway, so I'm going to get rid of this method that was just for the sake of
showing the clock,
showing the iClock,
okay,
and make this make this a pure DTO. You just set things. So instead, wherever we create an article, that's where we should be saying, hey, now I should use the clock. So presumably that's in a controller somewhere, and the controller is where you would expect to put dependency injection. So the controller would depend on iClock and would be passed in the system clock.instance. Normally, we can put that in the startup. And then when you're testing, you could pass in a fake clock and say, the time is now 11 o'clock. What happens, 11 o'clock UTC, or whatever instant you want to create. When I create an article, it should have the time of that instant. And yay, goodness.
Okay. Cool. So, all right, so we have the published here, and we'll use the published we'll use the published date time to persist to the database. Okay, but we want to use published now on our user interface when we're when we're doing the interaction with this here. So where should we go next? Should we go over to our create page?
So let's go to the create and do what I was just saying about, and then we could presumably test it. Assuming create already works, it would be nice to see that we hadn't broken the idea of now. I've removed it from this code, but
of course create works. I wrote it.
Well, it won't work now, of course.
Right.
Now I've removed the bit of code that was saying set it to datetime.utc now.
Okay.
It's just going to come up with the default, which in fact for instant is 1970.
Okay. So I'm over here in the create model. This is the page model that goes with our Razor page.
Right.
And right
this
now
it's changed to this. Just I don't mind too much for the constructor because hey, we're likely to put something in here like an iClock. But yeah.
Okay. All right. So we could inject the iClock there and then specify it in startup. And then we'd be able to test that it saves with the appropriate time.
Right. Because presumably the article that is bound, that's coming from the UI, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And we want to ignore whatever published property it passes in because the UI shouldn't determine when things are published. Otherwise, some nasty user could tell us that it was published in the future.
And you know what? I have that property on the page right now. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open that page, and I'm going to put it down at the bottom of the screen here. There it is. So there's John working on the article there, and you can see I have published here as a value that somebody could key in. I think you're right. We should get rid of this here on lines 22 through 26.
Yep, I see it.
So let's do that. I'm going to get rid of those so folks can't key that in.
Right.
So now it's not saving a published time, which is okay. We want to default that now.
Right. So that's where we would accept. I'm assuming that create model, this is just dependency injected and it will be fine to do this. Follow your conventions, and then all we need to do is article.published equals clock.getCurrentInstant. Okay,
cool.
So that would work, but I assume if you try to run it now, it's going to say, "Oh, I don't know how to get hold of an iClock." And in fact, it
Right.
doesn't even know what iClock is because we haven't added the DateTime
The
using
using
directive.
statement. Right.
Right.
So we should register an iClock in startup. So I'm going to
Mhm.
go open startup and scroll down to our configure services. So here's where I've got my MVC configuration for some routing things that we're doing. There's entity framework configuration. So we should add Noda time clock for time-based testing. All right. So that would be like services, and it's a singleton, right?
It is. Yep.
So let's add a singleton, and it's
Of an iClock.
right. So I will do iClock and control dot, so I get my using statement.
Right. And now you just need system clock.instance.
System, is it system clock? There it is.
Yep.
Dot instance. There it is. All right. So now when my create page fires, it will receive the system clock and it'll appropriately set the system clock as the current instant.
Right.
Fantastic. The current time.
Whereas if we were writing a test for create.cshtml.cs, we could pass in a fake clock and get that going without having to worry about the only thing that should know that really we want to use the system clock is startup itself.
Sure. Sure. Because we're going to override that in our tests or in other places where
Exactly.
we need to instrument.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We probably want to do something similar in the edit page and update that publish date appropriately over there as well.
Right.
So I'm going to open edit and I'm going to make sure I have the publish date in here as something people can edit. Now that might make sense if we did something where you could edit a page and say, don't publish this until, and there was something.
Okay. Yes.
But we're not that fancy yet, you know?
Right. Right. And then it would probably still be worth recording when the edit happened versus when it was published.
The scheduled publish date.
Exactly. Created, last modified, last published. Those could all be three different things.
Yeah. All right. And then I'll go back over to the edit behind the page here, the page model. And there's my on get. Now this one, of course, we have for an edit page, we do have to go get the value from the database and load it up appropriately. But you were saying let's receive an iClock here. And we'll call that, clock. And I'll control dot on this so I get my using statement. And I will add clock equals clock.
Now, of course, viewers may be thinking, hang on, this is code duplication. We've got the same code in both edit and create. And that's kind of, we need the application DB context. There are things that will be passed to multiple controllers. But if you had, I wouldn't expect to see an iClock in a viewing controller because you don't need to know the current time in order to view an article.
Sure. Well, in fact, it's just
we were trying to represent it as it was published 3 days ago or something like that. But it's kind of getting into cutting stuff.
Sure. Sure. Thanks for the subscription, Fossils. I appreciate that. Get to continue using the .NET bot emote. Very cool. All right. So now I'm setting the publish date on the edit. So this should be saving and updating those published dates appropriately in the database. Now, I think we've changed. Did we change the model here? I think we may have.
Yes, I think we changed it. We changed the title of the property from, I think it was originally published, and now it's published DateTime. So presumably you could set what the mapping column is called.
Oh, yeah. All right, so let me go back. Where is it? Article. I'm going to do control comma and get to article. Yeah, right. We can set the name of the column here, and I think isn't it it's something like column. There it is. Represents the database column that a property is mapped to. There we go. and
Okay.
it was called published, so I'll leave it with the same name.
Right. And it was previously a DateTime, and assuming so this is an interesting thing. What kind of DateTime is Entity Framework going to pull out of the database and pass into this setter? I have no idea.
Well, yeah. So, well, okay. So,
And this is where before you had, well, I'm setting it to a DateTime UTC. That's great when you're creating it, but what about when the database is saving it and rehydrating it? You could already have had a problem because it may not have always been UTC. But
well,
we can see.
so I'm actually a little bit concerned here, and follow me for a second. In our pages in create, we set the publish date to an instant in time, so that'll set the actual value. Okay, I was just concerned. Actually, I was concerned we might have had a circular reference here. All right, so yeah, it's going to save the UTC time coming out of published,
Right,
which
but I
won't
don't
be
know
as
whether
accurate.
so we'll have lost some precision.
Yeah.
Although, frankly, the precision is going to be given that system clock still only calls to datetime.utc now itself, so it can't be more precise than ticks anyway. So we won't really have lost any precision. We'll have lost notional precision.
Okay.
So that's a trade-off we've decided to make. What I'm more worried about is you save a datetime with a kind of UTC. When Entity Framework loads it, will it know that it should load it as if it were a UTC thing? What
The
SQL
time zone.
thing? Yeah, so is it going to say it's a DateTime with an unspecified kind? Who knows?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And this may be something that's configurable on the property, or possibly in the SQLite configuration, because I don't know what DateTime kinds SQLite has.
No, it's very simple.
Right. Looking
hadn't
here,
thought of
it
that.
says it doesn't have a storage class set aside for storing dates and times. Instead, the built-in date and time functions of SQLite are capable of storing dates and times as text, real, or integer values. So, yeah, this may or may not work. It would be interesting to just give it a try. Do you have a database that we can just see what happens?
I do. So I have a WikiDB right here. And actually, look at that. That's I didn't expect it to try and open that and show me text here for the database. But I do have a plugin that will allow me to open it. Let me see here. And I see there's some questions about how to get Visual Studio Live Share in the chat room, and some moderator folks are helping handle that. I do have, where is it? It's like a SQLite browser or something here. I forget what it's called. There it is. SQLite Compact Toolbox. So we should be able to, let's see, let's open database, browse to it, and it's here. There it is. There's my little wiki database. Yeah, okay, good. Go, do it. So now here's the database, and I can see the tables, and there's my articles.
Okay, right.
So let's do a new query. Right? Do you want to see the data?
So yeah, well, let's have a look at the schema. If you just sort of expand one more,
sure.
what's it going to show?
Look at that. It saves it as text.
Okay, so my guess is it's going to save it as ISO 8601, but it may have it with a Z or not. So can we look at all the data that we've already got? Yeah.
All right, and I'll execute that. So it is. I'm only getting second precision, and it's literally writing that.
Right. So if I were, I don't know what I would do if I were an engineer working on Entity Framework Core. If you see that text and you're being asked to deserialize it as a DateTime, what do you do? I would probably make that something that can be configured. So maybe there's some attribute that can say, hey, I know it's a DateTime in the database, but let's assume that it's in UTC.
Okay. So back here in the article, Our concern is that kind attribute and getting it to map.
Right.
Otherwise, we're going to change the published instance if it's not mapped to
So
UTC
in
time.
fact, if it comes back not as a datetime kind.utc, our setter will throw, because NodaTime says, hey, if you don't give me a UTC time, I do not know what instant it is. I'm not going to sort of assume it's local and start using the system default time zone, because that's just too flaky for words.
So, our friend Fossils here in the chat room is saying when I was in the configuration screen for adding a new SQLite database, it said something about date time kind in there.
Oh,
Let's take a look at that again. Is it? I wonder if it's here in database info, database size. Is there?
see, I would expect it to be more about because it's just a text column in the database. This is really about how Entity Framework interacts with the database.
There we go. Date time format. There it is. See?
Oh, okay. So that's, yep.
Oh, look at that.
Right. So yeah, ticks would be another option. Oh, and there is datetime kind at the two properties down, and that's the one that you want.
Which one?
So kill. You're in datetime format at the moment, so just hit escape, and then 2 properties lower. Is unspecified. Right, that's what you want to be UTC.
Okay. Now, but that's the property on connecting to this database.
Right.
Entity Framework is going to build and connect to the database automatically for me here based on that configuration setting that's over in Startup CS. So I'm tempted to say, let's see if there's a datetime kind property over there when we're doing the SQLite configuration that we can force that to UTC.
So this is part of a connection string. I assume you're specifying the connection string somewhere.
Yes.
So yeah,
it's got to be in there. And also, would we prefer setting the datetime format to something a little bit more precise, like the Unix epoch?
It doesn't.
Or
ISO
ticks.
8601 is nice and readable.
Okay.
That's the main benefit. So it would be nice if it could do ISO 8601 down to the millisecond or microsecond, but let's get it working for the start.
But thinking out loud, for the purposes of a wiki, we're only really showing down to seconds.
Right.
We don't. Yeah. For this purpose, we might not need to be that precise, but that's available to us if we need it.
So the one place where it might make really interesting reading is if you had an edit war going on and you kept a log of all the edits. It would make sense there could easily be multiple edits within 1 second, but probably not within 1 microsecond unless you were really unlucky, or 1 tick. So yeah, that's where it may make more sense to have more precision.
Okay, so let's see if we can find these in our entity framework configuration and change those settings, and then we can figure that out a little bit more here. All right. So over here in startup is where our configuration is. So right now, there it is. It's just a use SQLite with a connection string there. Are there properties on this? Options. DB context options, that's not going to be SQLite
So
specific.
I think it's probably just a matter of putting semicolon datetime kind equals UTC.
In here?
I'm just looking at SQLite connection strings.
Something like that. But nobody uses SQLite in production, so why spend time on this versus looking at Postgres, Azure SQL, or SQL Server?
Because it's going to be the same kind of decisions, basically.
Yes, exactly.
They will be slightly tweaked, but it's the same kind of, what precision do I want? What format do I want? What else is going to read this database?
Absolutely. When we do talk about in a future episode here, when we do talk about scaling up to those other databases, whether it's SQL Server, Azure SQL, Cosmos DB,
Spanner,
Firebase, we'll be able to make these same discussions at that time.
Yep.
So it's a great question.
Some of those will have a timestamp type that is where this isn't an option because you wouldn't specify a time zone for a timestamp because you're just trying to represent an instant in time.
Yeah.
So it's similar questions to thinking about the in-process, .NET representation. Do I want instant or the other options? You get exactly the same kind of thing when you then move to the database.
Okay. So that SQLite connection string, are there options there we need to drop in?
That I reckon that may well just work.
Really? No spaces, just datetime kind equals UTC?
Yeah, well, I've got an example in connectionstrings.com that has datetime format equals ticks, which is what we saw before. So I reckon datetime kind equals UTC has at least a good chance of working. So I think we should just fire it up and see.
All right, here we go. Throwing caution to the wind. Let's see here. Okay. That all looks good, so let's give it a shot. And the dog is upset at somebody. I don't know if you can hear that. There she goes.
Yes. More interestingly, something has started on my local host. I'm not sure whether you hitting run has. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Oh yes. All right.
Yeah.
So
it started locally for me as well. That's kind of scary.
and right, that's a feature of the live share is that we're both able to see at the same time.
Okay.
All right.
So you were using to short date string.
Right. Instant doesn't contain those things.
It absolutely doesn't. It has to string, which is available and sort of slightly discouraged. It tries to isolate the idea of DateTime tries to isolate the idea of text handling to what's called patterns. So you can have an instant pattern, which can excuse me, which can be used to format an instant as a string or parse a string to an instant. And part of the idea is that you don't start passing around like string literals or to short date string, etc. Instead, if you've got a pattern that you want to use in multiple places, you define it in one place as an instant pattern, and you can use that. However, we could start off just by removing to short date string and just use to string, and then we could at least see that something's working at all. Now, my Visual Studio has locked up, I guess, while something else is going.
No, well, you should be in debug mode also, right? You have the orange bar at the bottom.
I have not responding at the moment.
Okay. So I'm gonna stop the debugger and see if that opens things up for you. I want the Solution Explorer open. There we go. And I need to have the Solution Explorer as wide as me so that I don't hide code. All right, so we were in that's a details page that first shows up that has, there it is. So model article published.
Right. So if you in fact, you could just use it as model.article.published and let toString get called automatically, and that should work. It will give the default instant representation, which I can't remember. I had exactly the same kind of exactly what do I do with an impedance mismatch for DateTime, and I think instant.toString defaults to a culture invariant ISO 8601 with a Z on the end. So that's what I kind of expect to see. Visual Studio is still not responding for me. So although
I hit restart,
still seeing localhost is
So I'm starting. Look at that. All right.
Okay.
All right. So DateTime kind. Now it's actually connecting to the database, and we're getting the error around that connection string.
Yep. And I'm just. Oh, yeah. So I'm reading Thomas Levesque's .NET blog, which suggests that you can set DateTime kind to. Hang on. Right. Yeah, they've got DateTime kind.utc in the example. So that's interesting that it's not working.
Do I have?
I will ping that article to you on chat, and you can see that in more. That was, yeah, that's the one, and you can see he's got DateTime kind. So you don't have a type of DateTime kind or anything? I'm going to kill Visual Studio. If you could reshare with me, and
You
that
should be
might
able to use
also
that.
fix my.
You should be able to use that same link in the Skype chat
Excellent.
and get reconnected. But keyword. Okay, so that doesn't look like the right. I hate to think it's a capitalization thing. But
No, it shouldn't be because you had it in the appropriate caps.
yeah, let's go back here. Semicolon datetime kind equals UTC.
Yeah.
Sure looks the same.
So I wonder whether it's that. Are you using a different provider? Which .NET library are you using to connect to Visual to SQLite?
It's the one that comes with ASP.NET. It's that one. It's the thing. All right, so let's expand and drill through here. All right, so it's going to be Microsoft Entity Framework Core, SQLite,
Aha.
which refers
So
to Microsoft Entity Framework Core, SQLite dot core, Microsoft Data SQLite dot core, Microsoft Data SQLite dot DLL.
okay, I am now getting to another page that will hopefully be useful. Blog post, specify datetime kind in entity framework core while querying.
Oh, look at this. And they even referenced Thomas's blog post as the correct answer on Stack Overflow.
Wow, so there's all kinds of. There's a horrible way of doing it, where you've got to define an entity materializer source, and then a date time mapper,
Oh, dear
and
Lord,
then
no.
replace as this. Yeah, so then specify things in DB context.options.
Oh, dear Lord,
That
no.
sounds like a really large amount of work for something that should be, frankly, it should be the default.
Yeah.
If we know, so I suspect that our viewers won't want us to be looking at this for too long.
No.
So I just suggest that we kill the. Can I stop debugging?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll get rid of the property. Sorry, the connection string property. I can't edit now. Oh, now I can.
There we go.
Okay, and then in article, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to put datetime kind dot specify specify kind. Sorry, datetime dot specify kind value.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's basically saying whatever kind we've been given, we'll assume that really it's giving us the UTC, and then we can do the right thing. So I don't know why to instant isn't okay. This will probably work for you, but not for me because again it hasn't picked up node of time, which is fine.
That's strange because you disconnected and reconnected. It should give you all
Yeah,
of the stuff.
who knows? Who knows? However, my guess is that this will now work. So obviously, normally we would write an integration test to check that we could save a node to the database and that the instant would be the same, or possibly even write a second integration test saying, well, if I set it to 356 nanoseconds, I expect it to be truncated down. But that can come another time. So let's just try.
Let's give it a shot.
Viewing the database now.
And then we can write some tests. We'll see how much time we have here.
Right.
All right. Started the. And. Hey, now we've got a value. Terrific.
Right. And we have that at least very clear that this is in UTC because it's got that Z at the end. So that happened at midday on the 29th of March.
Yeah, I think we hard coded that value. Let me go over to. And are you seeing the same browser or on your side?
Yeah, I'm seeing homepage, so
Yeah.
presumably we can now create a page, and then
Yes.
we would expect, given the code that we've written, for it to say April the 10th, 2018 at 15:12 UTC.
So I've removed the publish date, so we can't do that now. So let's
Right?
just call this first page with John. This is a test page to verify the published date is stored properly. All right. And create. And now it's coming
Look at
back.
that! It is genuinely UTC. Hooray!
Fantastic. All right.
Cool. So that has proved that we've got no time working at all to start with.
Sure.
Because we're definitely saving something to the database via DateTime and getting it back and recreating an instant. This is all. I'm pleased with this. Hooray!
All right. So now we want to actually format that as the local time for the folks who are browsing to the site.
Right. And this is where things get tricky. Because I don't know what time zone you're in. Or rather, the server doesn't know what time zone the user is in necessarily.
Necessarily, yeah.
Yeah. So wouldn't it be nice if one of the bits of information a browser gave you was your time zone?
Doesn't it?
No. Well, you can find out your current offset from UTC
Okay.
reasonably straightforwardly. But
That's a
what
JavaScript thing, isn't it?
there is a JavaScript thing to. There are JavaScript packages you can use that will do this for you.
Okay.
And we're about to discover the second benefit of using NodaTime.
Do tell, please.
So, if we want to tell the server what time zone we're in, we're going to pass it as text somehow, right?
Yeah.
So what text would you expect your browser to give the server?
Gosh. Well, it's not going to give Eastern time zone. I would expect it to give like UTC and then a plus or minus with some value of hours and minutes, I would think.
Well, but that's no use because other people might have the same, and that's the bit that is easy to get from JavaScript, from plain JavaScript.
Okay.
So, for example, at the moment, for me, it's UTC +1. There are plenty of other places in the world where it's UTC +1 as well, and we should all see the same time for this page. But if we got a page created, say, at Christmas, then I should see it. Sorry, no, the page created now. I may be in the same UTC offset now, but when I come later on,
Oh, wow.
I want to see how that instant in time was, but now.
Well,
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm going to say all that again because it was really, really unclear. Okay, so I am currently in UTC +1, but if a page had been created at Christmas, then that would have been when I was at UTC +0. Someone else who is currently at UTC +1 may be at UTC +1 the whole year round, or may
Okay.
change offsets at different times. So what we want isn't the idea of the current offset from UTC, it's my time zone. So an identifier for the time zone.
Okay.
Now, time zone info, which is what .NET supports, only has one idea of IDs. Well, it's sort of, now that we've got .NET Core, it's, well, whatever the system time zone uses for it. So if you're running, I don't know what operating system you're using, but in fact, let's add that. How easily can you just run a little bit of code, put in another string?
Sure. We can do that. Absolutely. We can actually do it right here in the Razor page and dump it out on the screen without
Fantastic.
recompiling. Right?
Wonderful. So if you, and this will be interesting. So I'm running on Windows.
I am as well.
Okay, right. So if you include timezoneinfo.local.id.
All right. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to just output timezone info
Yep.
dot local
Yep.
ID.
Right.
All right. I will
Okay.
save that and we should be able to refresh the page. And there it is. Now on my side, it's outputting Eastern Standard Time.
Right. Now, the first thing to notice is you're not in Eastern Standard Time. You're in
Mm.
Eastern time. You're not even observing Eastern Standard Time. Um, the Windows time zone IDs are dumb.
Okay.
They're really badly chosen. It says let's pick the name of the standard time and use that for the whole time zone.
Okay.
That was a really bad move. Um,
Instead of
but
just Eastern time and then deciding whether we were in daylight savings or not.
that would be slightly better. But
Okay.
even Eastern time isn't very specific
Mm.
because different states have varied between Central Time and Eastern Time at different times.
Oh,
So
yes.
suppose you had an article published in 1965. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know which states were and weren't in Eastern Time. And you've got someone who is in Eastern Time now, but back then the same location wasn't in Eastern Time versus something that's been in Eastern Time all the time. Eastern Time is not a good identifier for this.
There's
And this is
a
why the IANA time zone database. Oh, what's the time in Indiana? Is yeah,
Yeah,
um,
Indiana's a crazy one.
yeah,
Right, and I think that might be where you're talking about. Here it is. There's this wedge where it's in central time, right? And it's because a lot of these folks they're commuters and they actually work in Chicago, so they want to be in
but even so,
Chicago
you're
time.
only looking at a snapshot. And the thing is, imagine that you could see this page over time, over several years. You would see different colors,
It changes because different folks.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Whereas a time zone is meant to say, do you know what? You give me any instant ever, and I will tell you what the UTC offset was.
Okay.
And also the kind of abbreviation, whether I should say it's EST, EDT, BST, whatever. Um, so Eastern Time does not fulfill that requirement
No.
because, or it can't for two different people in different states which changed at different times.
So when we look at how folks who use Linux or various Unix operating systems, they have as a
Right.
time zone things like America slash New York.
Exactly.
I'm annoyed there's no America slash Philadelphia. We'll get back to that.
The choice of cities is an interesting one and causes umpteen problems on the time zone mailing list as well.
There's a
Anyway,
mailing
so
list?
you have no idea
Oh boy. Okay.
the interesting discussions that go on. I won't go into it because we'll just never come out of that rat hole. Uh,
Okay.
however, this is IANA, the same ones that do the number allocations and whatever. If you search for IANA time zones,
Okay.
you'll
And
find the
to be
fairly
clear,
brief.
you're using IANA, IANA.
Yes.
That's an acronym for an international body?
Yes, it's the international. What is it? Internet Assigned Numbers Authority.
Okay.
And they basically took over the time zone database from Arthur Olson when some company was threatening to sue Arthur Olson for having all this data that he'd carefully collected with other people. And a company was going to sue. And Diana said, well, tell you what, why don't we take it on? And then they can try to sue us if they really want to.
Mm.
Is my understanding. I could be wrong on the exact legal side of that, but that was the spirit of things as far as I'm aware.
So should I go to this first one?
Yeah. So that is where you can go for more information.
Okay.
But the
Oh my
interesting
gosh.
bit is that IANA is what basically everyone in the world apart from Windows uses.
Oh boy.
And even bits of Windows. I think if you're writing a universal Windows app, then bits of that can use IANA.
Okay.
But the good news is NodaTime supports IANA.
Okay.
And any JavaScript time zone detector is going to give you the IANA time zone out
All
of
right.
it. So at this point, I would be writing JavaScript detect time zone. And oh look, Stack Overflow has the answer for us. And the first the first answer's wrong.
Oh,
It's a real
no.
shame. Yeah.
This one, get time zone offset.
Yeah, because that only gives you the offset. It's not a time zone.
Okay.
So you really want to find a time zone detector. Um, and I wonder whether Moment.js has something. And I would like to think it would because I know the folks who work on Moment.js and they're good people. So,
There we go.
oh, there's INTL. I'm not. Oh, INTL is the internationalization API. So, oh, maybe these days it does it. I'm just going to try in a browser here. Um, so if I use, wow. So you can use intl.datetimeformat.resolvedoptions.timezone.
I'm gonna move my console up here so we can. It's kind of hiding behind me. There we go. So INTL, you said?
Yeah, I've just dumped it into Skype.
So if I grab, oh, look at that. All right. I'm going to copy out your comment here. Oops. I'm getting confused. There we go. So if I
Right.
run
And
that,
let's see what it has.
so now it says America, New York.
Fantastic. Okay, so our next problem is that's on the browser.
Hmm.
So how are we going to get that back to the Razor page?
Ah.
Can we make that? And this is where my knowledge just drops off the edge of a cliff because, hey, this is client-side stuff. I don't do client-side stuff.
Sure. Okay, so let's take a look at the headers that were requested. Network. So if we refresh this page and we take a look at
Yeah,
what was
it's
actually requested,
right.
and the headers that were sent, it doesn't include any
There's,
information
there's
about.
not going to be, yeah,
Yeah.
lovely as it would be, we basically need to run that code client side and stuff it somewhere. Now, could we put it in a cookie and run that code and
GDPR. No, I'm
refresh
sorry.
the
I'm.
cookie? I don't know.
That's a GDPR thing. You can't do that. I've been fighting the data protection privacy law there
So,
for the last few days. Um,
so we have a whole other option, which is rather than get the user's time zone to the server, we could do the reverse and give the the instant in a nice, easily digested JavaScripty format um, in the page, and then get JavaScript on the page to say, "Hey, how would you like to render that?"
and let the JavaScript format it for us.
Yes,
That also gives us the ability then to cache this page regardless of which time zone you're coming from and not have to render it differently because you're in UTC +1. I'm in
right.
UTC -4. Different
Yeah,
and cache it two different times. That seems silly.
right. So I guess what we could do is put the last published timestamp, the actual rendered bit, in a div or whatever, so that we can maybe still render it with UTC for folks who don't have JavaScript enabled, but then have a bit of script that would
On load, do the conversion.
right.
Okay.
Um, and that makes me wonder. So, how do we get the data itself? We could, if we're emitting the whole page, including this bit of script, we could hard code the data into the script. That feels a bit ugly, and doesn't help in terms of minifying scripts and things.
Well, okay. Thinking out loud. So here I am looking at the details page. What if, just like you were saying, what if we wrap this as a span
Yep,
and
that's what I meant rather than div. Yep.
yeah, and if we say data,
Oh,
right? If we say data dash like value. Oh, look, there's all my old Angular features because nobody does Angular like that anymore. So data dash, right? That's kind of an open-ended HTML5 thing, and
fantastic.
I can actually just put that value right in there in the same format, right?
Right.
So let's copy and push that in there, and
But
then let's give this a class, and let's give it a class
oh,
of date
nice.
value.
Yep.
So
Well, let's
then,
let's make it a class of timestamp value,
okay, sure.
because dates we may want to handle differently.
So timestamp value, and then I'll just finish wrapping that right there. So now I've got my value hard coded into, not hard coded, but it'll always be emitted into the data dash value
Yep.
attribute. And I know that this is a timestamp value element, and I can have lots of those on the page. So what I should be able to do is write some script.
And handily, by the way, the JavaScript date constructor will accept ISO
That
8601, which is, yeah,
Okay.
it's
So,
almost like having standards is a good thing.
so I should be able to say, go find all of the dates on the page by doing something like var dates, right? Well, let's call it timestamps.
You realize you're on your own at this point because I cannot help you. It's just
All right, we'll get this. So I could say document dot, and then I want to do a query selector, and I want to grab everything that is a dot, so the class timestamp value. So now I have all of those. I have everywhere on the page that there's one of these things.
Mhm.
All right. So now I want to do a for each across those and do the reformatting. So if I do a, it's not a for each, right?
It's
in
for
JavaScript.
span 4 timestamps. I seem to remember, or
I think
of.
let's
I
call
did
this.
this recently.
I think it's 4ts in timestamps. Watch the two C# guys fumble through
Yeah,
JavaScript, right? Here it comes. Just display the date in every single time zone, no
yeah.
problem. That's not going to work. For each, for var of. That's what I want. Thank you.
Yeah.
See, this is why sometimes, John, I refer to this as pair programming with the internet, because somebody in the chat room is going to say, oh, this is the way you should
Oh,
do that.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, all right, so that'll give me the element. So I've now got, right, each TS is one of these. So I can grab the data, the date value, right? So this timestamp equals TS dot, and I would say like get attribute data dash value.
Yep.
Right, so now I've got the date there. Now I want to do the reformat and stick it into the text value of this.
Right. So we can use the JavaScript date class as var, var date equals new date this timestamp.
Var date equals new. Yep. Date this timestamp.
And apologies if using datetime dot from string or parse or whatever would be more idiomatic. This is Jon JavaScript noob.
You know what? It works.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I could say this timestamp dot, and then isn't it like dot value? No.
No, we want ts dot text content, I think.
Oh gosh, yes. I'm referring to the wrong one. All right, change that to the correct case, and then we'll say just date dot.
So if we can use toString for now,
just to get it working.
Just for now, and then realistically, this is where I would strongly suggest we probably want to use Moment.js because it knows all kinds of formatting and stuff. That's what it's there for.
So let me reload the page and see if that little bit of JavaScript works for us. And, well, okay, that's fine. Timestamps is not iterable because there's only one.
But you're saying query selector. So that's, what does query selector return? Does it return something that you can use to get stuff, or does it actually return the?
It should return.
Oh, it returns the first element. So you don't want query selector. You want query or something like that, or select.
Query selector all, I bet.
Oh.
Node list of. That's it.
Okay.
I bet you that's it, right? There we go. All right. And that looks like my time now.
Raha.
It's
an
ugly format.
Look at the same thing. If I find where we are, I see it as Thumar 29/2018, 1300 GMT plus 01 GMT summertime.
All right. So in the chat room, they're saying try using get elements by class name. That makes more sense. Get elements by class name, and then I can
It's
get rid of
almost
the
like
dot.
if we just express in English what we want to do.
Wasn't that what they tried to do with Basic? There we go. Okay. So now you're I think you're on the right page here. We should use something like Moment.js
Right.
to properly force the issue there to do a better formatting of that.
Yep.
Now let's see if the new feature is available for me here. I'm going to right click on lib, and nope, Pac-Man is not here yet. I'm going to stop the project and see if I can get that to appear. A new feature that they were adding, my friend Andrew Hall on the Web Tools team was telling me that there's a new feature called Pac-Man, the package manager, that allows you to say, add just this JavaScript library, and it'll go find it out on the CDN and write
Right.
it to disk. And it
Nice.
doesn't look like it's here yet, so we might have to fumble with NPM to get it in.
Again, you're on your own. Good luck.
All right, here we go.
When I start a new project, I see anything NPM like and just go, I'm just going to run away screaming now. I do not understand these things.
Okay, I'm going to do an npm install, and I believe it's just Moment.js. Let's see if it finds it and does the install. Correct package name is Moment, not Moment.js.
But added one package.
Yeah, what did it add?
Oh, I see. So it said this is a bad idea. I'm going to do it for you anyway.
Isn't that friendly? All right, so here, plus Moment 2.22 added one package from 6 contributors. Right. I don't need to know how many contributors.
So we should probably is there an npm uninstall Moment.js? Because it sounds like it has added it and we don't want it.
Nope, it's not here. And actually, it didn't write it into the dependencies file. So let's into the package JSON here.
Right. There were certainly some interesting looking errors while it was saying it was managing it.
Scary. All right. Our friend Smab says I have a pull request for the npm stuff on this project. Cool. That's right. I did see there was a pull request to move that around. It's really interesting, John, when I get pull requests from viewers, because they have some really neat ideas of how to work with the code here.
Right.
All right. I want to move and put. I'm just going to add a folder here and move the files by hand, because I think Smab has a good piece of code to do that move for us automatically. But for now, just to get it moving along and without digging into that, I'm just going to move it by hand, because I'm funny like that. All right. Let's grab the minified ones. So I'll copy these out and go over to www.root, lib, moment, and paste those in. There we go. All right. So there's a bunch of files here. Moment min, locales. I'm guessing I just bring in moment min?
So yeah, I think just moment.min.js should be okay if you only care about people using English.
For now.
I'm not gonna
For now. We'll figure out more. So now, all right, so I have moment min in the page. So I don't know how to use it to do that format.
So I have what format do we want? Because it looks, the front page of momentjs.com is pretty nice. We can say moment .. .format. And in fact, I think we probably want, hey, I don't know why I'm saying all this when presumably I can edit it.
Why don't you just write the code?
Yeah. Because it will certainly be amusing to everyone, I suspect. So which one are we in? Details, yeah?
Right. And we'll move this up into a script specific to the application so we can carry that around.
So I think we can do moment date .format, and then what format do we want? we can do, let's do LLL, which is, looks like fairly long date and time.
Okay.
Okay, and then that
Restart
may be
the.
all we need.
All
Let's
right.
go. Let's go.
So yes, in the chat room, that's right. You saw Jon Skeet write JavaScript. Somebody
Badly.
clip that on Twitch. So we should see it fire. Cool.
Oh, looks good to me.
So,
Ship
well,
it.
here's the problem, right? That on my side it says 8 a.m. Oh wait, no wait, that was not the page that we
Right.
modified. Let me go
So
over.
if we look, have we got latest changes? Oh, that
Oh,
fails.
because it's
Oh,
still
we've got
using.
another short date string. Yeah.
Right. So, well, let's fix that page while we're here.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to grab the span and copy that over for where it has, yeah, item published. This right here. Now, this feels like to our friends that are learning ASP.NET with us in the chat room. This feels like it could eventually become a tag helper,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we're if we're going to be doing this same thing over and over again, we're going to want to do. There I go again. Gonna wanna. You're going to want to make that something that's
Reusable.
yeah, right. So
Yeah.
you enforce that same thing everywhere, and I got to fix
And in
that.
fact, in the NodaTime website, um, so you can tell that I wrote the NodaTime website because it's awful. In fact, someone else did the original design, and all of that stuff's fine. But yeah, there's ghastliness, particularly when it comes to any of the benchmark things.
Mm.
Uh, all the benchmarking code is mine, so the UI is foul. But that uses tag helpers for exactly this purpose. It's sort of, hey, I've got an instant here. Please format it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's another place where we're going to want to run that same JavaScript, but let's make sure it works
Yeah,
properly. And that looks good
and
to
there
me.
we go. Yay.
That's formatted in my time, and I don't have all that extra goo hanging next to it.
Right.
That's awesome. I mean, this feels simple. It feels easy.
And
Um,
admittedly, we haven't used any of the benefits. So the only NodaTime type we've used is instant. If we were getting the user's time zone into ASP.NET Core,
mhm.
then we would use one of the date time zone providers and fetch the date time zone from that. Fetch the date time zone based on the ID that we've been given. And then you can convert an instant to a zoned date time by just using instant.inZone, and then you provide the zone. And it
So
says, all right, well, that means it was over here, and this is the offset and all of that.
so a zoned date time is like my local time, like we're seeing here.
It's a date and time. It actually represents still an instant in time because it knows the offset. So you can have two zoned date times that both represent 1:30 in the morning on the same date,
Okay.
but one of them is the earlier version and one of them is the later version, and it can tell the difference.
Okay.
So it is an instant in a time zone. But when you ask for what's the hour of day, it will give you the local one to that time zone.
Okay. Okay. So
And it again knows the time zone itself. So one of the things you can do is say, well, what happens if what will the time be 24 hours from now? Because it may not be the same time of day.
right, because you may jump daylight savings.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So let's clean up just a little bit here because we have on our latest changes page we have that same thing going on where we do want to reformat the time here.
Probably anyway.
So I would like to take that little bit of script we wrote here in the details page.
Do we have a site.js that we can dump it in?
So we do. There is a site.js. We could move this same script over there so it's always executed and then put those two references in our layout page so that every page gets that format.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see if we can do that quickly and easily here. I'm just going to copy this site.js. Now I feel like that should be a function, right? So that it's always there, right?
Right. Yes. Reformat timestamps.
So I'm going to create, I don't need that. All right. So let's call this reformat timestamps.
And I think we now have got all the different to short date string to long date string, etc., etc. So I think it was just the listing and the view.
All right, cool. So that's easy. And then when we finish loading the page, I just want to call reformat timestamps.
Yep.
That's easy.
So so that function there is what's called on every. Right. Yes, because you presumably pull in site.js. So now all we need is for the layout to pull in moment as well.
Right. So I'm going to remove this script block, and I'm going to copy. I'm actually going to cut the reference to moment there in details and go over to layout. So layout for Razor pages, it's hiding in this pages folder, and then where is it? Layout. And down at the bottom here is our script block. So there's my site min.js. So before that, I need moment. All right.
So that's that one's only going to happen in non-development. Yeah, you need.
Yeah, it's in the wrong
same
place.
Thing.
Let's just move it down.
Well, you could have that and have the minified moment.js when you're doing production, and the non-minified moment.js if you wanted when you're doing development. You know, in case you need to debug into moment.js.
Sure.
But
if I was a developer working on moment.js, that makes sense. Let's see. All right. Let's see if that fixes and just works on our other pages, like latest changes here.
Boom.
Looks good. That was easy. And if I go back to the home page.
So when you first did the, let's query all the things, it was like, well, hang on, we know there's only one. Why don't we just get it by ID? Now I see why it makes sense.
I had an ulterior motive. Very cool. So here in just an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, we introduced DateTime and we wired it up. That was real easy to do, to get it to save our date stamps and reload them, format them properly. And now we
improve testability at the same time.
Yeah, I've got to do testing. All right. All right. I got to do testing. But we're almost out of time, so I want to kind of put a bow on this, you know? I think we're in a really good place here. Let's see.
I was impressed with how quickly we could do the client side.
Yeah, right. And that's a real testament to moment.js to let it be able to do that formatting for us. And quickly and easily. My gosh, those folks have done a lot of work on that. Now, you had mentioned, just to rewind a second, moment.js, when we're formatting these, to your point, it's not formatting the time based on my current time zone, but it's formatting the time based on the time zone that I'm in at that time, not necessarily now.
I'll be pedantic. It's formatting it based on your time zone, not on your current offset.
So there we go.
An offset is just your current difference from UTC. Your time zone describes every offset ever.
Sure.
Okay, so that's the thing to really remember. And unfortunately, even standards bodies get it wrong. So ISO 8601 says, hey, if you've got a +05 at the end, that's your time zone indicator. No, it's not. That doesn't tell you the time zone. It just tells you an offset. Yeah. So it's unfortunate. But if I can get nothing else across to viewers apart from the difference between a time zone and a time zone offset, then that's still a good use of time.
Sure.
I should, for the sake of people who don't want to, I didn't come here just to plug DateTime. I'm happy if we get more users, but you don't have to use DateTime. Everything we've done here could have been done using DateTime, just really carefully, and document this must always be UTC. And you would probably still want to have have a property with something to make sure that however the database loaded it, you still had it in UTC, because your mental model is, this is a timestamp. It makes no sense to have it in a time zone that I don't know about.
Okay.
And likewise, the testing business with iClock. iClock is an interface with a single method. If you want to, you can define your own iClock interface with the same method that returns a date time and is documented that it always returns a date time with a kind of UTC, and then you can write your own system clock.instance that always uses datetime.utc now. It really is trivial to do. That's not the impressive bit of NodeTime. Okay,
No.
there's a lot that I'm proud of in NodeTime, and some of the the separations and making you think about the right things is great. But I know that people are in situations where they can't just add dependencies. So if you are, I'd still advise you to have a look at NodeTime, have a look at the documentation, which describes all of the core core concepts in a lot more detail than we've gone into today.
Oh, sure.
And then you can think, well, those concepts can be applied. They won't each have their own type and nicely laid out, but you still want to think about which of them is most applicable for the data you're representing. If someone is if someone's typing in their date of birth, you may need to represent that as a date time, but you can think of it as if it's a local date, or whatever nomenclature you want to use.
Sure. When we typically think of somebody's birth date, it is just a date. We're not right.
It's not in a particular time zone.
Nor is it. Or are we really thinking about someone's birth time of day? Typically.
Right. Indeed. So it's entirely possible for someone to celebrate their birthday if they're in a different time zone from where they were born, more than 24 hours out of when they sort of should.
Oh yeah,
they could be celebrating it sort of on the wrong date. No one cares. It's just your time of day.
Right.
And likewise, what time have I got? My alarm clock on my phone is set for 6 a.m. That doesn't say 6 a.m. in a particular time zone. It's just a time of day. And again, we don't have a type to represent that in .NET. The closest we've got is time span, but that's really an elapsed period of time. So have a look at NodeTime and see the concepts that it describes. Think about how they apply to your problem space, and then if you choose to use NodeTime, great. Hopefully we'll give you an easy time of it, and please file issues if things don't work as you'd expect them to, or you have feature requests, but you can still apply the same ideas. And I definitely want to get you came on saying, oh, time zones make my head hurt, they're awful. Date and time stuff is manageable. The better tools you use, the more manageable it is, but it's definitely not something that people should say, I'm never going to understand it, therefore I won't even try. Put 2 or 3 hours, which sounds like a lot of time, but if it improves your conceptual model of how to work with dates and times, you'll save so much time in the long run.
It's a problem that you can figure out with a good whiteboard and some time drawing timelines and points in time and thinking about
being really clear at every point about what you're trying to represent. That's why I was pedantic about the difference between time zone and offset, because once you start going slightly off the rails, you're in a world of pain. So you need to be really precise with your terminology all the time. But if you can be disciplined like that, it is manageable, I promise.
Fantastic. Just want to take a look, see if we have some questions in the chat room we can answer real quick. Somebody was asking about what pair programming is. I like to think of it as when 2 or more folks get together and we're sharing one keyboard and mouse and we're collaborating together on one screen, one project, just like you saw John and I do here. And we got some comments from folks in the chat room that said, oh, you should try using, what was it? The query selector by class, right?
Right. Exactly.
Fantastic. It's right, there's no stress on it. We're all collaborating, trying to make our code better together. So
yep.
Discordia says, I feel like everything said here about time zones applies to character encodings. Oh no. Oh no.
There's certainly there's a lot of parallels to be said. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
That it's not an exact mapping, but yeah, they're certainly similar in terms of you can just get by without thinking too hard, and you will have an okay time until you don't understand why you've got a load of question marks in your logs. And at that point, you may well have lost all the data and you can't get it back again. And it's worth
Oops.
taking the time to get really solid on these fundamentals. On the other hand, if you're really, really early into your programming journey, these are not, I wouldn't say these are advanced topics only for stunt coders, etc.
Oh gosh,
But
no.
there are probably more important things to learn to start with. If you're still having trouble with syntax, then yeah, punt, use DateTime. It's really easy. Go for it. That's fine.
Absolutely. If you're
Um,
building that application that's just for your local office of 10, 15 people, you're fine with just date time.
Right, and there are an awful lot of applications that never need to work between 1 and 2 in the morning on the time of daylight saving change, etc. Um, I still, I think life becomes easier if you've got enough spare capacity to learn to do the right thing. And I'm not saying I always have the right answer either. But if you have the time to think things through, that's great. But it's probably not something to get hung up on if you're still trying to put together your first web page. Then, just it doesn't matter. Just dump anything there. But have fun doing it. I don't want anyone to get disheartened because all of this is complicated.
Right. And I think we had for the basic website where we were just saving UTC time and we weren't really thinking about it coming back, you know, okay, that's not a bad start. Now we're using a library that's a lot more precise, more testable, and we've got great formatting on the front side, so it looks
Yeah.
appropriate for everybody for their time zone.
Right. And in fact, the when we were saying, oh, should we use the with locales or not? I think the code that we've got, if you just install a slightly different npm package, you don't need to change any of the JavaScript you've written for it to suddenly be showing Avril instead of April if you're in France.
Oh, to do the translations.
Yeah, and
Okay,
to use the right format as well for what people expect.
cool. One or two more questions here. What do you think about C++?
I try not to think about C++.
Well
Um,
said.
No, I don't know enough about it to be critical of it, to be honest. When I have tried to use it, I found it very complicated, but I'm aware that great things have happened in the last 17, 18 years. Lots of changes. It's just I happen to stick to what I know most of the time.
I, I feel similarly. I know enough C++ to be dangerous, and that's about where I'm going to leave it.
Right.
Fo asks, does Visual Studio Live Share support native code or is it managed only? Currently, the team tells me that they support Node.js, they support C Sharp and .NET managed projects. They'll do project sharing very well with ASP.NET Core, and they're working to expand that support base. Good question. I'm sure that we'd love to see things like Xamarin and WinForms and WPF work with it. They're starting small with the first set of projects and they're building out. Let's see. Sanad Meskin asks, in this step where we say get published to date time UTC, here, is that a redundant step? Because when
Right.
we're setting, it's already UTC.
But we've changed representation. So we got a date time and we said, oh, you've probably given me an unspecified one. I will change it to a UTC date time. And then we've said, I don't want a date time at all. I want a node time instant. And then to convert from a node time instant to date time, the fact that the method is called to date time UTC is just to leave no one in any doubt whatsoever about what the result will be. It's a date time with a kind of UTC. And that's the only to date time method that there is. There's to date time offset as another alternative. But yes, we are converting when the setter is called, it's converting it from a date time to an instant. And then when we fetch it again, in order to, I guess, for Entity Framework to serialize it to the database, it converts it from an instant back to a date time UTC.
Easy enough. All right. I'm going to commit these changes to our data to our repository here. Let's just, right? This is how I end
Mm-hmm.
every stream. Let's clean up and save what we've got. Added DateTime, moment.js, and fixed our time and time zone management issue. Fantastic. Push, and our code is available. And you can check that out on my GitHub repository at github.com /Fritz core wiki. There's a lot of issues out there. A lot of folks have suggested some additional features, some fixes that we can take a look at. I'll take a look at those in an upcoming stream. But we're about out of time. Thanks so much, John, for coming on. I really learned a lot about this. This was great. Thanks so much. We'll take a snapshot of this video and archive it off to YouTube so everybody can rewatch and follow up on things. The source code, like I said, is available. I'll see you back here on Thursday. I don't have a guest on Thursday, but I'm really happy with how today went. I learned a lot. So we'll catch everybody next time. Take care.
Bye.